yesterday CNN did about 7 to 8 hours of climate change focused town halls with some of the presidential candidates. I'll give them a little bit of credit for doing this because no one in mainstream media has ever dedicated this much time to actually talking about the issue of climate change. But let's be clear, this in no way makes up for how horrendous their climate change coverage has been in general for the last however many years and decades. And specifically in presidential races and primaries, they don't even talk about it. I believe in the entire 2016 Democratic primary, there wasn't one single question about climate change asked by the moderators in any of the debates for the entire Democratic primary. So this is, I guess, a step in the right direction. There were some substantive questions asked at this during these town halls, but I do give most of the credit for this even happening to the environmentalists and the activists who've been putting immense pressure on the DNC and on media outlets to actually cover the issue of climate change during this primary season, because it is one of the most important issues of our lifetime, arguably the most important issue, and the clock is running out for us to actually do something about it. That being said, now let me get to Elizabeth Warren's town hall, and I have some more about this. I have some things to say about this. If I were to sum up Elizabeth Warren's performance at that town hall, I'd say it was a lot of grandstanding, and more than that, and the grandstanding that she was doing was predicated on this one lie that she keeps telling, and nobody really seems to have called her out on or corrected her on. So I'm gonna try to set that straight in this video. Now, I would separate the grandstanding that she did in that town hall into two separate categories. The grandstanding around the corruption in Washington, D.C. and in government in general that has perpetuated the climate crisis and exacerbated it. And also, she was grandstanding around, it's this new persona that she has, this flaming lefty who is willing to do whatever it takes, take on whoever it takes to tackle this climate crisis that we're in and radically transform the energy system in the United States. So let me start with the grandstanding about the corruption. This was a theme that she kept bringing up, that she kept going back to throughout the town hall, and it's something that she brings up quite frequently when she's talking about other issues on the campaign trail. She ties it back to the money in politics. It's one of the biggest issues in the country because it's so directly connected to all the other issues. And the rhetoric she's using is spot on. I agree with it. Yes, money in politics is the reason why Exxon and all these other Shell and all these other fossil fuel companies have been allowed to pollute the environment and exacerbate climate change. It's because they have donated to politicians. They have ties to the political establishment. So the rhetoric makes sense. I'm with you right there on the rhetoric, Liz. But my problem is there is a glaring hypocrisy in the argument you're making. You acknowledge that the reason why the climate crisis has not been solved is because people keep taking money from the fossil fuel industry. But you yourself have said when the general election comes, you're going to be taking corporate money. You're going to take all of the money. These are her words. All of it. Fundraisers, super PACs, corporate PACs, lobbyist money. And in all of that, it's safe to assume that she'll be taking money from the fossil fuel industry as well. Because she's, like she said, against unilateral disarmament. If the Republicans are going to be taking this money, we should be taking their money too to stay competitive. That's Elizabeth Warren's argument, which is the same as all the other corporate Democrats. So let's be clear about that. So I'm still waiting for Elizabeth Warren to explain how it's going to be, how her taking corporate money, her taking money from the fossil fuel industry is going to be different from when all the other corrupt politicians take money from the fossil fuel industry and do their bidding. Why should we believe that you of all people are going to take the corporate money, you're going to take the fossil fuel industry money, and you're going to be the one to stand up to them at the same time? I don't believe that because you haven't shown anywhere near that amount of political courage. And further than that, it's just a systemic human nature thing. You take that money, you're relying on that money, and you begin to do favors to them. You begin to go easy on the industry, and that's just how the corruption of money in politics works. So there is massive hypocrisy there. and she was livid too. She was worked up, fired up, talking about how the system works well for the well-connected and for the donors and for the corporations like Exxon and all these other fossil fuel companies. And she directly attributes that to their political contributions, but she will still make the argument that when I take that money, I'm not going to do that stuff though. You can trust me, Elizabeth Warren. When I take that money, I'm not going to be corrupt because I told you so. And for a second, let's talk about Elizabeth Warren's strategy to not take corporate money in the primary, but to take corporate money and super PAC money and all the money from billionaires and all that stuff in the general election. Why does she think it's okay to do it in the general election? The reality is Elizabeth Warren isn't as against money in politics as she's pretending to be. Because if she was, she would remain consistent. The same principles would still apply in the general election. If you think taking their money makes you beholden to them in the primary, why wouldn't that be true in the general election? If I'm being honest, this comes off as a cheap trick that she's trying to use to pull one over on progressives. She wants to go through the primary with as little pushback from the progressive left as possible. She doesn't want to cross them. She doesn't want to be on the wrong side of policy issues from them. So she's just saying all the shit that she thinks that they want, that she thinks that we want to hear, so that she could avoid criticism. She thinks if I'm not taking the corporate money in the primary, I could say I'm just like Bernie Sanders. I'm not corrupt, and Bernie Sanders supporters won't really have anything to hit me on because technically I haven't taken the corporate money, and I could say I'm just like Bernie Sanders on this issue. But there's a bait and switch there because she's hoping that she gets the nomination and then she gets to the general election, and then she's going to take the corporate money, and then she's going to be just as corrupt and act just as beholden to donors as every other politician who's come before her. And at that point, the progressive base is going to be stuck in a situation like we were in 2016, it seems like we don't have a choice. It's either Donald Trump or Elizabeth Warren. Which one is it going to be? So she's right now, her strategy is to put us right back in the same position as 2016, voting for the lesser evil. And both sides are beholden to corporate donors. So that neither one of them are going to bring the radical revolutionary change that we need in Washington, D.C. and in U.S. politics. So she is already planning to put us right back in the same position because she doesn't really actually care about getting money out of politics. It's a gimmick that she's using in the primary so she can say and pretend like she's just like Bernie Sanders to avoid the criticisms for her actual policy beliefs. And her actual beliefs are, if the Republicans are taking corporate money, then I believe the Democrats should be taking corporate money. And that is the mindset that has run the Democratic Party for the last however many decades, which has led them to continue to sell out the party and to sell out the voters and to sell out the working class of this country so they could keep up with the Republicans and so that they could stay competitive in the money race, in the horse race aspect of politics and who can raise the most donations. So Elizabeth Warren's actual beliefs on money in politics is if the Republicans are going to be corrupt, we might as well be corrupt too. But she doesn't want to actually stick to her guns and defend that position in the primary because she knows that's an untenable position and she would actually lose because the progressive base of the Democratic Party doesn't want anything to do with that. So she wants to lie to you in the primary so you have no choice but to suck it up and vote for someone who's taking corporate donations in the general election. So that's her whole game plan with not taking it in the primary but saying she's going to take it in the general election. So it's incredibly dishonest, as if progressives didn't have enough reason to distrust Elizabeth Warren. Right now she's admitting that she's going to play you, and that was on full display on that stage last night with all her grandstanding about the corruption and the money in politics that has led both parties to ignore the climate crisis and led to where we are right now, where we're facing an apocalyptic scenario because we haven't addressed the climate issue like we should have decades ago. But in reality, Elizabeth Warren, we all know when the general election comes, she's going to, just like Hillary Clinton, just like Barack Obama, she's going to take that money from the fossil fuel industry and then she's just going to do them favors. She's going to be beholden to them and she's not going to be as tough on them as she should be. And then now I want to get to this other area of her grandstanding last night, was this fire-breathing flaming lefty who's willing to do what needs to be done to address the climate crisis, no matter how much it costs and no matter what powerful enemy she's going to have to take on. As someone who has followed the issue of climate change and the climate crisis that we're in for the last few years, what I'd say after seeing Elizabeth Warren on stage all animated and fired up about the issue and talking about our lives depends on it and the future of humanity depends on it and our kids and their kids' future is depending on what we're doing right now. All of this rhetoric about how climate change is such an existential threat. When I'm hearing all of these things from Elizabeth Warren, I'm like, yes, okay, I agree with you, but who is this person? Because I've never met this Elizabeth Warren before in my life. Before you started running for president, I have never met this Elizabeth Warren, this environmentalist, this climate activist. Who is this person? Because the reality is, you were in the Senate. You were a United States Senator for over 6 years, and I haven't heard this from you. I have not heard any rhetoric on the issue of climate change from Elizabeth Warren. This has been one of those issues where she has been notoriously, conspicuously absent on this issue. She claims to be, and she does have the title of the second most progressive senator in the United States, but where has she been on this issue? She hasn't said anything. There have been no proposals. There have been no plans. She hasn't given all these grandstanding, robust speeches on the floor of the Senate. She hasn't called out the corruption in the Democratic Party and the Republican Party when it comes to taking donations and doing the bidding of the fossil fuel industry. She hasn't been mobilizing environmentalists and climate activists. She hasn't put out all of these substantive plans to reduce carbon emissions. She's done none of that. She did none of that for 6 years. And now that she's running for president and climate change consistently ranks as one of the most important issues in the Democratic primary for the Democratic voters, now she's going to, like I said earlier, she's going to try to pull one over on progressives and leftists in the party and say, oh, look at me. I'm almost just as left as Bernie Sanders. So really there's no difference between the two of us. And that is bullshit, Elizabeth Warren. That is bullshit. We know you didn't have this big talk and bluster about the issue of climate change when Standing Rock was happening, when there was one of the largest protests against an oil pipeline being built ever. When that was happening in North Dakota, when Energy Transfer Partners was illegally building that pipeline through Native American territory, federally protected land, illegally, when that was happening, you didn't have anything to say about that. When they were brutalizing those peaceful environmentalist and climate activist protests who are standing with the Native people, when they brutalized them, when they arrested them unlawfully, when they shot them with freezing water, when the temperatures outside were already below freezing and gave hundreds of people mass hypothermia, when the police and the private security that was hired they did blow off a young woman's arm because they shot a tear gas canister at her out of a grenade launcher. When that happened, Elizabeth Warren said not a goddamn thing. She had nothing to say in defense of Standing Rock and the peaceful environmentalists and protesters who were out there trying to make a stand against the fossil fuel industry and Energy Transfer Partners. Elizabeth Warren, where was all this grandstanding? Where was all this bluster? Where you couldn't bring yourself to do a press conference about this, to talk about it in any interviews. You had nothing to say about it because you really didn't care about the issue as much as you're pretending to care about it right now. So this is why I'm saying this persona that she's trying to build as a flaming lefty on the issue of climate change, this radical environmentalist who's willing to do whatever it takes, that is bullshit. That is grandstanding. That is not the Elizabeth Warren that we've known for however many years. That's just not true. But hey, if you think I'm wrong, if you think that Elizabeth Warren is actually going to fight against the corruption in Washington, the money in politics that has led to inaction on climate change, or if you think that, no, she actually has always been this flaming lefty on the issue, on the environment, and she's always been out there trying to protect the air and the water and she's always been trying to reverse the changes of climate change. She's always been out front on this issue. If that's the case, where were you in the 2016 Democratic primary when Bernie Sanders was running? When Bernie Sanders, who was running on the same platform of radical left policies to address climate change, when he was running on getting us to zero carbon emissions, when he was running on ending the use of fossil fuels in the United States and ending the extraction of fossil fuels in the United States, when he was running on a $1 trillion infrastructure plan to revamp our infrastructure and build it so that it runs on renewable energy, when he was running on that platform, that environmentalist platform, that climate activist platform, you weren't there. You didn't endorse him. You weren't campaigning with him. You weren't spreading that message with Bernie Sanders. You weren't there. You were silent. You were quiet. And beyond that, it goes beyond that, because the narrative that Elizabeth Warren has been trying to push as to why she didn't endorse Bernie Sanders in 2016, the lie that she's telling, and it is a lie, is that, oh man, there was two candidates running. They were so great. They both had good ideas, and I was just sitting in my couch watching the TV, and I was like, okay, let me see who I actually align with more. Is it Hillary Clinton or is it Bernie Sanders? And then what would you look at that? I looked at my watch, and the Massachusetts primary just went by, and I didn't endorse Bernie Sanders, and he ended up losing Massachusetts by less than 1 percentage point. Oops, my bad. And then the primary went on, and it became inevitable that Hillary Clinton was going to win. And then I came out and endorsed Hillary Clinton, for the party unity and all that jazz. That's the story that Elizabeth Warren is trying to say and has been trying to push out for why she didn't endorse Bernie Sanders, who was obviously the most progressive candidate, who was obviously the candidate who was most serious about addressing climate change. That was her excuse. That's the excuse that she's been trying to push since 2016. Now, there have been some other theories in progressive independent media, because nobody's buying that, because we all know damn well that there was no real debate about who was more left, Hillary Clinton or Bernie Sanders, who had the best policies, Hillary Clinton, Bernie Sanders. There was no real debate there. So that never stood up to scrutiny among the progressives. The most widely accepted theory as to why Elizabeth Warren didn't support Bernie Sanders in the 2016 primary was that she was trying to make sure that she stayed on Hillary Clinton's good side so that she could be someone in the Clinton administration who was pushing progressive policies. So the theory is in progressive independent media has been, Elizabeth Warren didn't endorse Bernie Sanders because she was secretly trying to be undercover progressive operative in the Clinton administration who was going to be dragging them further and further to the left. That has been the theory in progressive independent media. I'm here to tell you that that's not true either. That's not true, nor is Elizabeth Warren's bullshit justification excuse that she's been pushing since 2016. Neither of those are true. What actually happened, the real reason why Elizabeth Warren didn't endorse Bernie Sanders in 2016 is because she signed a letter, as well as all the other female Democratic senators. They all signed a letter begging Hillary Clinton to run for the Democratic nomination in 2016. They signed that letter all the way back in 2013. Years before the primary even started, Elizabeth Warren begged Hillary Clinton to run for the Democratic nomination. So the reason why she didn't endorse Bernie Sanders is because she already wanted Hillary Clinton to run. She was looking for a spot as Hillary Clinton's VP. That's why she didn't endorse Bernie Sanders, because she was playing politics and she was thinking about her career above everything else. And it's inexcusable at this point. She wasn't debating whose policies are best, who's further left, Bernie Sanders or Hillary Clinton. She was buying time so that she didn't have to actually endorse Hillary Clinton and take a shit ton of blowback from the left. She already knew, she already had her mind made up that she wasn't going to endorse Bernie Sanders, and it was for her own political ambitions. all of this, like I said, it comes down to a lie. It is all predicated on a lie. This idea that she is so animated and she's so disgusted by the corruption that led to the inaction on the climate crisis, or that she's this flaming lefty who has nothing but policy proposals coming out of her, just falling out her fucking pocket when she's walking on the street, nothing but climate related proposals to address the climate crisis. That is all built on a lie. That isn't true, because if any of those things were true, you would have endorsed Bernie Sanders, and you didn't. Instead, you endorsed Hillary Clinton, who is as in bed with the fossil fuel industry and the fracking companies as you can possibly be. As Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton made dozens of stops in countries around the world trying to push their governments to allow fracking, a dangerous practice which most of them were against. But Hillary Clinton, since her and Barack Obama were taking money from the fracking companies, she was pushing for them to start the dangerous process of fracking in their countries and to allow U.S. Fossil fuel companies to be the ones to do it. So she was part of that corruption as much as anyone else, Hillary Clinton. Hillary Clinton had fucking lobbyists for the fossil fuel industry working on her campaign. Ken Salazar was going to be the head of her transition team. So he would have been helping Hillary Clinton staff her administration, and he was the head of her transition. So he's helping her pick cabinet secretaries. He's helping pick deputy secretaries. He's helping to pick who her scientific advisors would be. Ken Salazar was a lobbyist who has defended fracking vociferously. So that's the mindset that would have been in the Clinton administration that Elizabeth Warren was so desperately trying to get into. And more than that, we know that Hillary Clinton would have just been in a continuation of the Barack Obama administration, and we know how shitty they were on the issue of the environment and climate change. Barack Obama, as president, exported more oil from the U.S. than any other president in U.S. history. He extracted more oil than any other president. And he's a Democrat who would claim he believes in climate science and he believes that climate change is an existential threat to the planet. That Democratic president also said, you know what? Let me extract as much fossil fuels from the ground as ever before. And at the same time, I'll do double speak and say how big of an issue climate change is. So Hillary Clinton would have been in a continuation of Barack Obama's shitty climate policies. If not, she would have been to the right. And Elizabeth Warren still begged Hillary Clinton to run in 2016. She said, I'm not even going to bother trying to find an actual lefty to challenge Hillary Clinton or to run in the Democratic primary, or I'm not going to be that lefty myself. I'm not going to be that flaming environmentalist climate activist to run and say how important the issue of climate change is. She didn't say any of that. She said, I'm going to beg Hillary Clinton to run for the Democratic nomination because I think she's so good and I agree with her so much on policy. Don't tell me, oh, the times were different back then and we thought that's as left as you could go on the issue of climate change, on the issue of the environment. Don't tell me that, because that's bullshit and that's not true, because that's not Bernie Sanders. You compare Elizabeth Warren, a sitting United States senator, her actions in 2013 begging Hillary Clinton, who is one of the shittiest Democrats in the country on the issue of climate change and the environment. Elizabeth Warren was begging her to run for the Democratic nomination in 2013. And you compare that to speeches that Bernie Sanders was giving in the 1990s on the floor of Congress and in classrooms across the country, doing speeches wherever anybody would listen to him. And you compare how he talked about the issue of climate change, how he knew from back then how big of a threat it was to the existence of life on this planet, and how animated he was about it. You compare that to Elizabeth Warren in 2013 begging Hillary Clinton to run for the Democratic nomination. So don't tell me that everybody was as shitty as Elizabeth Warren on climate change in 2013. No. That's Elizabeth Warren. There are some people who actually principled and actually cared about this issue, and they're not grandstanding, and those people would be Bernie Sanders. That's why he put out that $16 trillion Green New Deal. The point I'm trying to make is Elizabeth Warren is grandstanding and lying when she's talking about climate change. you're not actually as disgusted and appalled by the corruption that has led to the inaction on the issue of climate change as you claim to be. Because if you were as outraged, you'd be saying, there's no way in hell I'm going to be taking money from the fossil fuel industry because I'm not going to be taking part in the corruption, and I have no intention of doing favors for them or taking it easy on them. I'm throwing the fucking book at them. That's what you would say if you actually meant that. But instead, Elizabeth Warren is like, okay, I won't take it in the primary, but I'll definitely take it in the general election when the Democratic base and the Democratic Party has no other choice but to vote for me or let Donald Trump be president. So I'll put you in the same goddamn position as 2016. That's how little Elizabeth Warren thinks about the progressive base of the Democratic Party. Just remember that. Hold that in your head. She's grandstanding when she's pretending like, oh, I've always supported all of these super detailed policies to reduce carbon emissions and get us to net zero carbon emissions and redo our infrastructure, spend trillions of dollars on our infrastructure so it runs on renewable energy. Liz, you haven't put out any of those policies. You weren't anywhere near putting out those policies or defending those positions back when it wasn't politically convenient. And now that you're running for president and it serves you to actually make the case for lefty policies on the issue of the climate, that's when you're doing it. So you're grandstanding and you're not being honest and you're full of shit, and I kind of see right through you. And the lie, the overarching lie here is, if you cared about all of this, you would have endorsed Bernie Sanders, but instead you endorsed Hillary Clinton. And now you lied about why you didn't endorse Bernie Sanders. You lied about it. You didn't endorse Bernie. It wasn't that you lost track of time in the primary and oops, the whole shit went by and I didn't endorse anybody. I guess I gotta suck it up and endorse Hillary Clinton now. That's not what it was. You decided in 2013 Hillary Clinton best represents your policy beliefs, she best represents your ideology, and she would be the best nominee in 2016. You already decided that in 2013, and you lied about it, and you've been lying about it ever since then. Grandstanding and lying is how I sum up her performance. And beyond that, let's criticize the actual policies. Her policies are always half measures. They're always a day late and a dollar short. Compare all of her proposals, compare all of her plans to Bernie Sanders. She has her shitty Green New Deal for the Pentagon, where she's going to try to get the Pentagon to use all renewable, to only run on renewable energy. And she has all these convoluted plans about research for energy storage and all these other things. We're going to upgrade our military bases so that they're more energy efficient. She has all these plans. All her plans include spending ungodly amounts of money on the military and also continuing all of these illegal offensive wars that we're carrying out throughout the world. That's her plan to reduce the carbon footprint of the U.S. military, which is the single biggest polluter on the planet. The way Bernie Sanders addresses the military, the pollution coming from the Pentagon, he says he's going to cut military operations so that we're not expending all that carbon into the atmosphere. And it's a more straightforward way of doing it. But of course, Elizabeth Warren is not there. She's taking the more centrist approach. When it comes to going after the fossil fuel industry, Elizabeth Warren says the way she wants to hold them accountable is she wants them to release their estimates of how much they think climate change is going to cost them as a company. That's her way of holding them accountable. Bernie Sanders has already said, and it's part of his Green New Deal proposal, he's going to demand the Department of Justice and the Securities and Exchange Commission, the SEC, do criminal investigations into these fossil fuel companies and their executives because they knew about the dangers of climate change and they lied about it to the public, and they've polluted the environment, and the pollution alone is killing people, but it is exacerbating the climate crisis that we're in and is posing an existential threat to the entire human race and all life on the planet. So yes, Bernie Sanders is going to open criminal investigations into them because they're criminally liable and they're criminally responsible for what they did. That's a huge difference between how Bernie Sanders wants to hold them accountable and how Elizabeth Warren wants to hold them accountable. Bernie Sanders wants to nationalize the energy industry. Elizabeth Warren wants to incentivize the energy industry to move towards green renewable energy. So she wants to provide tax cuts and subsidies and all of these capitalistic incentives to push the industry to be to more renewable energy. Bernie Sanders says, fuck it, let's skip the middleman, because honestly, up to this point, we have been over reliant on private industry, on these private companies to actually do something to address the climate crisis, and they haven't. And we're up into where our back is up against the wall, and we're running out of time to actually reduce carbon and methane. And before the climate crisis passes the tipping point, the point of no return, where we can never actually prevent the destruction of our planet. We've been relying on them and trying to incentivize them to actually do something about it, and they haven't. So it is the job of the government to step in and say, if you won't do it, we will. We're going to build an entire national energy grid that's run on renewable energy. And we're going to eliminate these private monopolies that are energy companies. And people can buy pay for their electric bill straight to the government. And that money will also go towards rebuilding the infrastructure. So the revenue that the government makes from people paying their electric bills after it's been nationalized and basically you have a public option for your electricity, all the revenue from the government, instead of it going to pad the CEO's pockets and the executives' pockets, all that money goes right back into reinvesting into the country. So those are huge differences between Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders. Elizabeth Warren wants to incentivize private sector to actually combat climate change, and then on top of that, she wants them to collect all the profits for themselves and spread it amongst the executives. Bernie Sanders says, fuck that, we're going to nationalize the industry, and all the profits that the government makes from selling this green renewable energy to Americans, we're going to put it right back into fighting the climate crisis that we're in right now. So it's the difference between them is night and day. And her on stage, she has a lot of bluster and she's very animated, and that's what she is. She's a grandstander. But when you really get into the policies and you get into her record, she's nowhere close to Bernie Sanders, and it's a bad imitation, and I'm not buying it. I hope people who are informed and see her gimmick and her tricks and her dog and pony show aren't buying it. And I hope people actually see Elizabeth Warren for what she actually is, which is a political opportunist and a grandstander. So that's my summary of what happened overall in the town hall. Now, I'm sure other people are going to do more in-depth breakdowns over specific parts of it, but when you actually highlight the hypocrisy of Elizabeth Warren, when she's going to take the corporate money, she's going to take money from the fossil fuel industry, and the fact that she's been silent on this issue, which has been a giant threat to humanity. She's been silent on it the entire time she's been in the Senate, one of the most powerful people in the country with most influence. She hasn't said anything about it. And you also bring up the fact that she willingly endorsed Hillary Clinton over Bernie Sanders. She thought that Hillary Clinton best represents her ideology and her policies on every issue, including the climate. She thought Hillary Clinton represented that more than any other politician, more than anyone else in the country back in 2013. So when she's on that stage grandstanding and getting all animated and throwing her hands all about and raising her voice and talking about the corruption and how we got to fight it, when she's doing all of that, no, it's a trick. No, it's a dog and pony show. No, she doesn't actually mean that. She's just trying to pull one over on progressives up until the point where the general election comes. And if she's a nominee, then she's going to take her money from the fossil fuel industry, and then she's going to tell the progressives to shut the fuck up and vote for me anyway, because your choices are me or Donald Trump. And that's what she really plans to do, which is why she's not taking the corporate money. She's not taking the fossil fuel money in the primary, so she could avoid the criticisms. But when the general election comes, if she's the nominee, all bets are off and nobody has any choice, and it's the lesser of two evils all over again.